Hey everyone, welcome to Commander's Corner. Today we are looking at Kellen the Kid and 15 cards that goes well with him. First, he's a green, white, blue, flying lifelink, human, fairy, rogue, that's a 3/3. And whenever you cast a spell from anywhere other than your hand, you may cast a permanent spell with equal or less mana value from your hand without paying its mana cost. If you don't, you may put a land card from your hand onto the battlefield. Which means we're going to cheat things out, and we're going to cheat things out, and we're going to cheat things out. Some of the ways we're going to do that is with the new mechanic, Plot. After you plot a card, you can place it in exile and cast it as a sorcery on a later turn without paying its mana cost, which means your next turn if you want. An example of this would be Railway Brawler. His plot cost is 3 and a green mana, and you exile it instead of casting it from your hand. His normal cost is a 3 and a green, and whenever another creature enters the battlefield under your control, put X +1/+1 counters on it where X is his power. The next mechanic that works really well with Kellen is Foretell. Foretell is during your turn, you may pay 2 colorless and exile this card from your hand face down, and you can cast it later for its Foretell costs. The next Foretell card we really want to run is Sage of the Beyond. He's a 5 and 2 blue for a flying spirit giant that's a 5/5, and his Foretell cost is 4 and a blue. Spells you cast from anywhere other than your hand cost 2 less to cast. This doesn't just affect Foretell, this also affects Adventure. Now, one of the good Foretell cards that you could be running in this deck would be Doomscar. For the Foretell cost of 1 and white, you can destroy all creatures, so it's always a good board wipe. Now, the next card and mechanic we're looking at is Kellen, Inquisitive Prodigy, and his adventure, the Tale of the Suspect. It's a sorcery where you investigate and you can play an additional land this turn. We want to cast it for sorceries first, so we could trigger Kellen the Kid by casting the adventure from exile. Now, Kellen's Inquisitive Prodigy is 2, a green and a blue, and he's a flying vigilance 3/4, and whenever he attacks, you can destroy up to 1 target artifact, and if it's an artifact you control, you can draw a card. Next up, Memory Deluge. It's 2 and a blue for an instant where you get to look at the top X cards of your library, where X is the amount of mana spent to cast a spell. You can put 2 of them into your hand and the rest on the bottom of your library in any order. But what we really care about is the Flashback cost, because Flashback is from your graveyard and not your hand. Next mechanic will be Rebound with Quantum Misalignment. For 4 and a blue sorcery, you can create a token that's a copy of target creature you control, except it isn't legendary. We'll be using this to copy Kellen the Kid, that way we get 2 Kellen triggers. Now, the important part of this is we're looking at Rebound. If you cast a spell from your hand, exile it as it resolves, and at the beginning of your next upkeep, you may cast this card from exile without paying its mana cost, which means on your next upkeep, you will get 2 spells from Kellen instead of 1. Now, one of my favorite mechanics and my favorite card, Apex Devastator. For 8 and 2 green mana, you get a Chimera Hydra, that's a 10/10, that has Cascade, 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 and Cascade. When you cast this spell, exile cards from the top of your library until you exile a non-land card that costs less. You may cast it without paying its mana cost. Put the exile cards on the bottom of your library in a random order. Multiple instances of Cascade each trigger separately, which means for each Cascade, you will get a free spell off Kellen. Alondo the Seer. For 2 and a green-blue, we get a legendary creature human shaman that's a 3/5, and we can tap him to draw a card, then exile a card from our hand and put a time counter on it equal to its mana value. It gains when the last time counter is removed from this card. If it's exiled, you may cast it without paying its mana cost. If you cast a creature spell this way, it gains haste until the end of turn. Then remove a time counter from each other card you own in exile. Now, if your cards aren't enough, let's use our friends' cards. Mind's Dilation. For 5 and 2 blue, you get an enchantment with whenever an opponent casts his or her first spell each turn, that player exiles the top card of his or her library. If it's a non-land card, you may cast it without paying its mana cost. Next up is Aminato's Augury. For 6 and 2 blue, we get a sorcery where we exile the top 8 cards of your library and you may put a land card from among them onto the battlefield. Until end of turn, for each non-land card type, you may cast a card of that type among the exiled cards without paying its mana cost. Now, if cards from our hand and our friends aren't enough, we have One with the Multiverse. For 6 and 2 blue, we get an enchantment where you may look at the top card of your library at any time. You can play lands and cast spells from the top of your library. Once during each of your turns, you may cast a spell from your hand or the top of your library without paying its mana cost. Next up, we have Rod of Absorption. For 2 and a blue, we get an artifact where whenever a player casts an instant or sorcery spell, exile it instead of putting it into the graveyard as it resolves. We can pay X and sacrifice Rod of Absorption. You may cast any number of spells from among cards exiled with Rod of Absorption with total mana value X or less without paying their mana costs. which means your friend spells again. Now to refill our hand from all the spell cheating we're doing, we're running Vega the Watcher. For 1 white and a blue, we get a legendary creature bird spirit, that's a 2/2 with flying. And whenever you cast a spell from anywhere other than your hand, you can draw a card. And lastly, we have Strionic Resonator. For 2 colorless mana, we get an artifact, and for this artifact, we can play 2 colorless to tap it and copy target triggered ability you control, and you may choose new targets for the copy. Thanks for making it to the end, everyone. Please like and subscribe. Thank you.